I heard this thing called debating, and I kind of needed a new hobby to fill my time. I was a little lost. But very quickly, I think debating kind of became much more than that to me. I think the great innovation of debating is.
Hi, everyone, and welcome back to the Debateful podcast, where we sit down with the world's top debaters to find out how they got there. I'm your host, Anya Martin Prashad, and today I have the honor of interviewing Matthew Anzarouth, one of the most decorated high school debaters that Canada has ever produced. Both in 2020 and 2021, Matthew was selected as one of the top 5 debaters to represent Team Canada at the World School Debating Championships, the most prestigious high school debate competition in the world. Both years, Matthew and his team were crowned as world champions. Individually, he ranked 3rd in the world in 2020 and 2nd in 2021. From there, Matthew went on to study social studies at Harvard University, where he competed with the Harvard College Debating Union and served as senior world editor at the Harvard Political Review and co-founded the Ad Hoc podcast. Now a Rhodes Scholar, Matthew is at Oxford pursuing a master's in political theory. So it is my absolute honor to welcome him to the podcast. Matthew, welcome.
Thanks so much for having me, Anya.
So Matthew, we've got a lot to unpack today, from your 2 world championships to what it takes to become a very successful debater, and even what debate is going to look like after high school. So let's start at the very beginning. What was it that made you start doing debate?
Sure. So it's a pleasure to be here. Thanks again for having me. I started high school, or the 7th grade, at our shared alma mater, having recently quit hockey because I got whacked in the head a bunch of times. And I kind of needed a new hobby to fill my time. I was a little lost. And I heard this thing called debating, and I thought to myself, I like public speaking, I like learning, I like competing, and debating struck me as something that had all those things. So I gave it a whirl. But very quickly, I think debating kind of became much more than that to me. It was a training in teamwork. It opened my eyes to all kinds of political and social issues that I otherwise wouldn't have really been engaging with as a 14-year-old. And I think above all, what I found most compelling and attractive about debating, whether consciously or not, now it's definitely conscious, I'm not sure at the time, was the training that it provided in understanding and empathizing with a diversity of viewpoints. Because I think the great innovation of debating is, the way that it forces you to defend a variety of positions that you don't necessarily share or agree with because you're randomly assigned to a side.
Mm.
And I think that basic training in uncovering the best arguments in support of a variety of positions, of deeply inhabiting a different worldview for 2 hours, conditioned me to, approach disagreement in the real world and approach, my own consumption of political news in a more reflective and thoughtful way, a way that was always attuned to the merit of other people's positions. And I think that basic sort of that training in empathizing and understanding is, I think, the greatest gift that debating gives its participants, and it's probably the main reason why I ended up devoting, the next, I guess, 6 or so years of my life to the activity.
That's really incredible, kind of broad understanding of the uniqueness of debate as an activity. And I really want to come back to that point about, shaping different perspectives. We'll come
Sure.
back to that later. But I just wanted to ask you, what were the first few years for you like in debate? You said you started in 7th grade. How did you navigate the process of being a beginner as someone who was already liked public speaking? How did you navigate that process? Were there any difficulties or anything you'd want to do differently?
Like most debaters, I stumbled pretty awkwardly through my first few speeches. I remember when we start debating, for most debaters, the most pressing problem is how to fill time, uh,
Yes.
which is to say, how to exhaust the 5 minutes allotted to you, or 7 minutes, or whatever it is. And then very quickly, eventually, you realize the real challenge of debating is condensing everything down into those 5 or 7 minutes, so that the problem kind of flips over time. But all that to say, when I started debating, um, I don't remember what my first few speeches were about, but I remember that they were not very good. But then, I attended weekly practices at school. Um, I made use of the vast amount of resources available on the internet, thanks to organizations like yours. I watched workshops, seminars, recordings of great debate rounds, and over time, sort of slowly got the hang of things. Uh, in terms of your question of, what would I do differently? Um, I think most debaters at some point have a phase of trying to emulate the great debaters and their debating heroes and kind of mimic their tendencies. And I was not immune to that tendency myself. I probably had a phase in like the eighth grade or something where I thought like the way to get really good at debating is to study what the great debaters do in the finals of big tournaments at McGill University or Queen's University or the great university debaters on YouTube. And I grew out of that fairly quickly, and I think the quicker that you can outgrow that tendency and really come into your own distinctive speaking style, uh, the better. And that's not to say you don't learn from your idols and debating heroes, but I sort of eventually came to my own unique combination of all these different sources of inspiration that I had, and I think that's when I really started to enjoy debating more and do a lot better at it.
It's funny you bring up kind of these like emulating great debaters. And I don't know if you know this, but in my generation of debaters, a lot of people would look up to your like finals of WSCC 2020 and 2021. Like those were kind of renowned as like the rounds to
Really?
watch as yeah, which is it's really interesting to hear you had the same kind of perspective, but for other debaters. Um, so just kind of to go a little bit deeper into this, would you say that it's kind of emulating or taking pieces? I know you said this, but is it really like taking pieces of different debaters and putting it together that allows you to evolve your style? Or is it, would you say that people need to kind of let go of like even watching those or getting inspiration too much from those types of sources? What would you say it is?
No, I definitely don't think there's anything wrong with watching great debate rounds, and they can teach you, for example, um, different ways to structure an argument, different ways to reply to arguments. They can also just help you accumulate content, like ideas for the substance of different arguments you can advance. But there's a difference between using that as sort of fodder and inspiration that you might later draw on, probably
Mhm.
subconsciously more than anything. There's a difference between that and, trying to mold your identity as a debater around, your heroes. And it's that latter tendency that I would discourage. But of course, there's nothing wrong with and much to be gained in learning from all the debaters who came before you.
For sure. And is there a moment that was particularly challenging for you in your debate journey at some point? And in what way did you overcome that?
Honestly, it's interesting to note that I can't remember too many challenging moments. Like a few years out of debating, I remember it mostly as just this wonderfully fun time. And I had a pretty good
Mhm.
attitude about losing and like moving on pretty quickly, and saying, I had a fun weekend in Kingston, Ontario, and I didn't do very well, but that's fine. And then move on and do better the next time. So I don't remember too many like major challenges. Although there is one thing that was sort of a hurdle, maybe around the 10th grade or so. Um, which is at some point in my debating career, I had trouble with note taking. And
Interesting.
it, so when I joined Team Canada at the end of the ninth grade, uh, I had really wanted to give third speeches. So for context, for unfamiliar listeners, in World School Style, it's 3v3. The first speaker is responsible for delivering the bulk of the constructive case, just like in standard 2v2 debating. The second speaker, also like in standard 2v2 debating, is responsible for extending the case, maybe adding an argument of their own, and rebutting the other side. The third speaker, which is the distinctive feature of World School Style, is responsible for primarily refuting the other side's case and thematically weighing both sides. And I really wanted to give third speeches. I liked rebuttal. I liked this sort of thematic overview of the round, but I just couldn't manage to have a note-taking system that allowed me to like gather my thoughts, write the adequate amount, um, but not too much that would distract me from listening and thinking effectively during the round. So for my first year or two on the team, I was what you would call a first speaker specialist. I only gave first speeches, and I love giving first speeches, and they were a lot of fun. But I always kind of thought like third speeches is what I really wanted to do. And at some point, I just tweaked my note-taking method and suddenly went from giving not very good third speeches to giving quite good third speeches. And it was really a matter of just figuring out how to take notes more efficiently and more effectively. I won't bore your listeners with that precise method in part because I don't remember it very well, but maybe the more general takeaway from this would be that debating is all about multitasking, and multitasking is very hard. And note taking is kind of like a paradigmatic example of like the difficulty of multitasking because you should be taking notes, listening, thinking, preparing to speak all at the same time. And I guess the other major takeaway would be that sometimes in debating, over the course of your journey and progressing as a debater, something kind of just clicks. And thinking back, I think my debate career kind of progressed in stages where, I was a beginner for some time, and then I was like an intermediate, doing well at the like regional level, and then I was doing well at the provincial level, and like all of these stages, um, throughout all these stages, I would eventually like level up to what I took to be the next stage. And oftentimes that would just happen when something just sort of makes sense, something clicks that hadn't clicked before. And I guess the word of advice that comes with that is not to get too frustrated at um, what you might take to be your own stagnation, for example, as a debater, if you're a beginner or an intermediate, because sometimes you just figure out, what was really holding me back was note taking, or it was this, that, or the other thing, and the improvements can come more seamlessly than you might think.
And for people who are starting off at this like new level, like maybe you're a beginner entering the intermediate stage, or you could be like a very, very beginner entering your first tournament. How would you say to deal with the loss of not ranking well in tournaments while that you're still waiting for that thing to click, you know? And then how should beginners kind of measure their progress, even if they aren't winning in this new level yet?
Yeah, I think it's really important as a debater to quickly reconcile yourself to the reality of failure because it is an essential component of debating. Even once you're past, I mean, your question is about beginner and intermediates, but this is true at all stages of debating because every tournament has one winner, one team that wins, and everyone else loses. And if you associate your worth, your identity as a debater, or your enjoyment of the activity with results, I think that's a bit of a recipe for disappointment because you will always feel that you could have done better. Um, it's also important to remember that there's lots of luck involved in debating. The luck of did you happen to read the right article the night before a particular motion comes up, or your judges will give you some wins that you didn't deserve and some losses that you didn't deserve. And I think taking it all in stride and not fixating too much um, on the results is probably your best bet for enjoying the activity as much as you can and also
Mhm.
improving because I think you will improve more if you're just focusing on your own improvement but sort of divorced from the immediate quantified feedback of debating. In terms of if you do want to measure your progress, like I think the best way to do that is not via like debating statistics, but um, as in the results that you're accumulating, but instead if you have a coach at your high school or your judges, like talking to them about things that you could do better. I think it's always good to leave a tournament or a debate round with one thing that you could do better the next time, and maybe also one thing that you did especially well in that round, and just to kind of have that in mind over time, and not to be obsessing too much over the particular trajectory of your results.
Yeah, that's an amazing like lesson to have learned, and that's something I really wish that I had known when I was starting out because it is very discouraging when you go to your
Yeah.
first tournament or first few, even the first few years in debate are incredibly discouraging. You did mention before you had a really good attitude to losing. Was that something that you developed over the course of like doing debate, or is this something that was kind of more innate? And then how would you recommend that people can, or what perspective could you share that might alter like how some people view loss and defeat?
Yeah, I don't know. I mean, I don't want to be like overly naive about it in retrospect. Like I'm sure I was a little bit bummed when I like lost a debate round. But I do think I moved on pretty quickly just by trying to bear in mind some of the things that we were talking about at the start of this interview, which are like the reasons why I really enjoyed the activity, which had relatively little to do with um, at least maybe at first it had more to do with the sort of competitive thrill of debating, having come off my uh, career as a recently retired 11-year-old hockey player. Maybe I was still sort of, interested in competition, but over time that like dwindled a little bit. And I think the more that you can remind yourself and have interesting conversations with people about what you get out of this activity and why you value it so much, the more you can learn to move on relatively quickly um, from disappointing results.
It's incredible advice. And I do think that that's something we miss a lot is like going back to that why of why you started something in the first place and not letting kind of the discouragement that you get kind of interfere with that reasoning behind why you started in the first place. And I
Yeah.
think this is a great point to kind of segue into the ways that debate has impacted you on a broader scale. So I first wanted to ask, how did debate help you? I mean, if you can recall in high school, I mean, you could even speak to now as you're completing your master's. What were the skills that kind of helped you out? And were there certain areas that helped more than others?
Yeah, everything is the short answer. So public speaking, obviously, interviews, you know, debaters are well trained at answering points of information, POIs, which are short, pithy remarks designed to throw you off, basically. And that's great training for like job interviews or college interviews and things like that. In high school and beyond, writing argumentative essays, like deep debating teaches you how arguments work, like how to understand what needs to be proven in order for an argument to hold. Um, uh, you know, how to structure an argument logically. Uh, those skills are super valuable in essay writing, argumentative essay writing. Um, Even just quickly internalizing new information in a classroom setting, um, because debate is all about like rapidly learning something, whether it's from your teammates in the prep room who are filling you in on something you didn't know before, or your opponents who are making arguments to which you have to respond. Just rapidly internalizing that, um, sort of cohering it into um, into a presentable set of arguments or responses. All of that is invaluable training in any context that involves gathering and acquiring knowledge, and that was super helpful to me throughout high school, undergrad, and beyond.
For sure. And I remember at the beginning of this interview, you said that you had already liked public speaking when you started debate. I want to ask this before, but was there an environment or something like even when you were starting out that, I mean, I can speak to this because I watched your like finals rounds was one of my biggest inspirations, but you have a very natural like ability to speak and it just sounds like your ability to argue is amazing. Was there somewhere like environment outside of debate that kind of shaped your ability to create persuasive arguments or even like, your ability to do public speaking incredibly well? Or was it learned and developed much through debate?
Well, thank you first of all for the kind words. Yeah, it can't be that it was before debating because, well, I mean, so I said I had some basic experience with public speaking in the sense that, like, when I was a 10-year-old, maybe I gave a speech in my elementary school class and I was like, oh, this is kind of fun. But I didn't have like any serious experience in
Mm-hmm.
public speaking. And I think so much of my development as a speaker and as a consumer of, political and policy news happened
Hmm.
through debating, not prior to debating.
Yeah.
So that process of evolution into a more comfortable and natural speaker happened very much in the debate room. Um, and while I might have started out with uh, a decent capacity for speaking, it was really something I think that developed over time. And like by the time I was in the 11th and 12th grade debating at the World Championships, it had been 5 or 6 years of honing these skills, which are not skills that we really go about our daily lives practicing. Like we don't go around spending, an hour constructing the best possible case. I mean, in some academic settings, maybe you do. And that's, why I've loved being at school these last few years. But for the most part, this whole idea of spending an hour in the context of world schools or a little bit less time in the context of Canadian parliamentary, thinking of complex arguments and converting them into a coherent case, like that's just foreign to our daily experience as
Yeah.
human beings. It takes practice, it takes honing and muscle memory as well.
Hmm.
So whatever I was able to do over the course of my debate career was very much the accumulation of those many hours of practicing those skills and honing those muscles.
Hmm. And as you were like entering debate, did learning about all the different topics like politics, economics, did that influence kind of what you wanted to pursue later on and study? And then in what way did that happen?
Yeah, it did. So one of the great things about debating, at least for people interested in the social sciences, I'd say, is that it exposes you to so many different topics and can really reveal to you what you find most interesting. And for me, I loved debates that were about philosophy, especially political and legal
Mhm.
philosophy. Those were the ones that I was most interested in and the ones that I think I was best at. And that's more or less what I've been studying since then. I mean, my undergrad was sort of at the border of political science and political philosophy, and now what I do in my master's is mostly political philosophy. And also worth mentioning, I'm probably going to go to law school next year, and there's obviously, for obvious reasons, a pretty strong um, debate to law pipeline. So yeah, I mean, substantively, debate definitely revealed to me the actual topics that I was most interested in. Um, but then you also have tons of debaters who are like computer scientists and mathematicians, and those people are super cool. They can do it all, which is pretty neat.
Yeah, I always found it so cool that some people like the paths that debate can take you are extremely different. Like you said,
Absolutely.
like you could go into politics or computer science. It allows you to kind of it's very broad, and that's what I loved about it. It's just that ability to kind of take those skills and apply them anywhere you want.
Yeah, I
And
mean, in any job, no matter what it is, you're gonna have to communicate, and debate helps you
yeah.
communicate. Um, and that's to say nothing of this, what we were talking about before, about the sort of understanding and empathy that debating breeds, which is just, those are valuable to any like person in the world, like citizen of a country.
Yeah.
And that's sort of independent of whatever path or profession you take.
Mhm. And it's actually a perfect segue because I wanted to go back to what you were talking about at the top of this interview about how debate kind of exposes you to different viewpoints. And that is something that is extremely unique about it. Often in rounds, you're kind of put into situations where you need to speak about a topic with a lot of confidence and conviction. You one like a side that you might not necessarily agree with, and that's what's so interesting about it, that exposure to different topics. So, how did that for you kind of impact your opinions or just shape the way that you think through issues?
Yeah, I think you put it very well. I guess, I think many issues are very complicated. And, if someone were to ask you, how do you feel about XYZ, um, insert whatever hot button political or policy issue is on your mind. Um, but probably the correct answer most of the time should be like, I'm not sure, let me think about it for a little bit. And I think debating makes you a little more likely to take that approach rather than
Mhm.
immediately yelling your preferred position on a given issue. And it's not to say that you don't hold deep convictions, because I think one of the criticisms that people sometimes make of debating is, well, you're just gamifying, real world issues, and you're learning to out argue anyone on any given position. And you don't really care about any of it. But that's not true. That's how the game of debating works. But that's not necessarily what happens once you leave the debate room. And maybe it is the case that like the potential risk of debating is that it can breed that kind of arrogance, that feeling that you can out argue anyone on anything. But I think the upside, which I've found to be much more common among my circles of debate friends and acquaintances, is that it uh, debating sort of reveals to you your own um, fallibility. It makes you hyper aware of the potential merit in positions that you don't share yourself, and ultimately, whatever conclusions you do come to, whether in daily life when you're arguing with someone about something maybe non-political, like
Mhm.
whatever it is, who's going to clean your how you and your roommates are going to divide the labor in your dorm room or something, um, or whether you're like arguing about something political or processing the news. um, I find that it does kind of condition that greater reflectiveness and thoughtfulness, and I think that's uh, a great gift and virtue that debating teaches. And I think it would be great if as many people as possible could experience debating in some way, even if not through like competition, because that's not for everyone, but maybe in like a classroom setting, um, a more low stakes environment to play around with different ideas, explore different positions.
Sure. And I know for me, like debate has had such a big impact on the way I do think about things. And I do think like one of the most unique and probably like impactful things is definitely the way it makes you think and consider like different perspectives. And it's really interesting that you say like I know a lot of people think about debate as, you're trying to win arguments, and there's this always kind of assumption that it'll make you, like you said, just automatically win any argument that you get into. But hearing this perspective is that's really different about how you approach kind of issues and conflict like outside of debate is incredibly interesting, and it's not something I've heard before, honestly, which I find really, really valuable.
Yeah, thanks. I
So
mean, debating, like people think about debating primarily as an exercise in speaking and arguing, but it's
yeah,
important to remember that in any given debate round, what are you actually spending most of your time doing is listening. 90% of the time allotted in a debate round is listening. And also, so I mean, one way that debate teaches the skill I was just talking about and you were talking about is the way that it forces you to defend positions you don't agree with. But the other way is as an actual skill of argument when you're responding to the other side's case. Every good debater knows that straw man fallacies, where you set up a weaker version of the opponent's case just to go on to destroy it, is not well rewarded by any good judge and is rightly penalized. And debate teaches you to take your opponent's arguments in the best light. And um, again, that's something that like our natural default settings as human beings don't really train us to do. Like that's not how we're prepared to internalize competing viewpoints. And I think debating helps us like rewire that a little bit and approach disagreement with a little more humility and empathy.
yeah, for sure. So even if people don't want to necessarily pursue it to the extent of like, I mean, really hyper competitive, I think there's still some really definite value in understanding the way it shapes how you think, like you said. And I think there's a lot of value just in doing debate, even if it's not like your thing for in the entirety of
Absolutely.
high school, university. There's a lot of merit to that. So, and this has been a wonderful interview so far. I have one last question, more open ended as we wrap up. Is there anything that you would say to people, let's say at any level, any advice you could give them, even if, let's say, they're like maybe losing rounds or wondering at this point if debate is still worth it? What would you say to that person?
I would probably reiterate some of what I've said about, well, I mean, first of all, debate, as you just mentioned, competitive debate is not for everyone. So if someone finds that they're not enjoying the activity, it's possible that it's truly just not for them, and that's fine. But I think there are a tremendous number of things to get from debating, and that over time, if you could focus on those things instead of the results and maybe your own temporary stagnation as a debater, you'll get a lot out of it. Whether it's the teamwork, the sort of thrilling experience of blending ideas together with your partner or your multiple partners on your team into a strong case. Whether it's all the friends that you make, made some of my closest friends in debating and got to travel the province, the country, and eventually the world with them. Whether it's the thrill of public speaking or whether it's what we've been talking about, that deep education in thinking and listening and hearing other people's arguments. I suspect that one of those many things will click in a very valuable and special way for a lot of people. So it's definitely worth giving it a try.
It's a wonderful answer. Thank you so much. This has been an amazing conversation. There's a lot of things that I really wish that I had learned when I was just starting out. These incredibly valuable like takes on certain things. So, to our listeners, we hope you enjoyed, and we'll see you next time. Thank you so much, Matthew, for joining us.
Thanks so much, Anya. Appreciate it.